If you had told me, even just a few years ago, that one of the whitest kids you know would be one of the most captivating and boundary-pushing genre filmmakers working today, I would have said you were insane. But in a post-Jordan Peele cinematic landscape, perhaps I shouldn't be surprised. There's no denying some of the most gifted comedians have a real knack for the macabre, and in 2022, Zach Cregger took the world by storm, blindsiding audiences with Barbarian, a batshit horror sensation in the vein of Sam Raimi that came almost from nowhere. With little more than a teaser trailer and a poster, it was the fervent word of mouth and shocking subversion of the genre that catapulted Barbarian into the horror canon, and Cregger into a surprising position as Hollywood's latest horror auteur. But even with how awesome a debut it was, even as a highlight among the modern horror genre, Barbarian's inventive thrills, unforgettable protagonist-shifting POV antics, the revival of Justine, devilish sense of humor, and surprisingly profound commentary on suburban decay and gentrification hardly began to hint at the masterful brilliance Cregger was about to unleash on us next. Though, perhaps we should have seen it coming. We were caught off guard by Barbarian, and so was the industry, but after a filmmaker announces himself like that, we all pay close attention to whatever's on the horizon. And if audiences were eager for Cregger's next hit, I mean, you could bet the distributors were gonna pounce hard this time.
A lot of times in life, you get to do something, and you don't realize until it's over how much you enjoyed it. And you swear that the next time it comes around, you're gonna remember that.
So, from the onset, Weapons commanded industry attention, igniting a seismic bidding war that rattled the foundation of Hollywood. A mad dash to be in business with the latest exciting new voice in horror. Weapons marked the chance for a studio to stake their claim on the next Jordan Peele, if you will. Something the studios have been chasing ever since Peele exploded onto the scene with Get Out. However, Weapons made for an interesting case because out of all the attempts to make rising filmmakers the next Jordan Peele, Cregger was seemingly the only one who garnered the support and attention of Peele himself. The ultimate seal of approval for a young filmmaker like Cregger, who not only considers Get Out a personal favorite, but an influence on his pursuits in horror. When Monkey Paw's joint bid with Universal was eclipsed by New Line Cinema, Peele's reported frustration was so immense that he severed ties with his management. And not only was the bidding war enough for the industry to set their sights on Cregger's latest project, but Peele's reaction, the guy who is considered the voice in modern horror, indicated that Weapons wasn't merely just a follow-up from the guy who did Barbarian. No. It indicated that Weapons was something special, something worth investing in, a film with something to say that was going to shock audiences to their core, something to be excited about. While that level of expectation can be daunting and detrimental to the final product, Cregger never wavered, embracing it head on and carrying over the confidence with which he wrote the script into production and post. And yeah, after seeing Weapons, I get it. I fucking get it. Peele's indignation was absolutely justified. Like, if I lost a film as twisty, unpredictable, thrilling, and topical as Weapons, yeah, I'd be pissed too. Weapons is the kind of horror epic you expect to see from a veteran filmmaker, not the work of a sophomore, for all intents and purposes, because 2009's Miss March doesn't count. With Weapons, Zach Cregger not only avoided the sophomore genre slump, but delivers a bona fide horror masterpiece, easily staking its claim as the best film of 2025 so far. Weapons masterfully blends the parental paranoia and chilling suspense of Denis Villeneuve's crime thriller Prisoners with the sprawling narrative complexity of Magnolia, peppered with the type of absurdist, macabre humor the Coen brothers sort of made their wheelhouse in films like Fargo, Miller's Crossing, even later fare like Raising Arizona. Weapons is a sharply aimed critique of our society's reaction to tragedy, particularly communal horrors centered around America's gun epidemic, illustrating how our destructive sensationalism and obsessive pursuit of the motive to understand the why paralyzes genuine progress. Rather than confronting the root causes, we fixate on superficial details, endlessly cycling through blame and outrage, thoughts and prayers, ultimately normalizing the objectively abnormal. If Barbarian showcased Cregger's command of structure and perspective, Weapons is a confident as fuck refinement of the form. Perspective takes center stage as Cregger deftly weaves together a Rashomon-esque tapestry consisting of 6 points of view ascribed to 6 different characters, charting the ripple effects of a tragic mass disappearance of school children in the small suburban town of Maybrook. Central to this web is Justine Gandy, played by Julia Garner. Justine is a compassionate educator with a tendency to overstep her rigid duties, who finds herself in the crosshairs of parental outrage and a media frenzy, becoming the de facto scapegoat due to past mistakes mistakes in her personal life, ranging from excessive drinking, flings, and an empathetic attentiveness to her students that goes beyond the classroom. In trying to make sense of a senseless situation, Justine becomes the town pariah, branded a witch. Her flaws laid bare as Maybrook infers the worst of her, even if the actual crime has nothing to do with her past actions. As Josh Brolin's Archer says, she's either negligent or complicit. Either way, she's to blame. The inhumanity with which Justine is treated underscores the film's criticism of a cultural inability to look inward. There's a readiness to vilify past judgment and blame, weaponizing grief to distract from genuine culpability because it's easier. It offers an answer, not a solution. And that answer comes at the expense of Justine's own emotions. She's in complete disarray, feeling intense guilt over what happened and isn't given the space to grieve along with the parents. Even though she arguably spends more time with their children on a day-to-day basis, she's just expected to teach the kids and nothing more. If they fail, it's her fault. If they succeed, it's the genius of the kids. If anything goes wrong, then she's gonna find herself unfairly in the line of fire. In her own words, under mounting pressure, she says,
I love those kids.
As I alluded to earlier, Justine is labeled a witch due to the tragedy, and while the town's inhabitants are hell-bent on burning her for what happened, they're missing the very real witch that's the cause of everything. The people are blinded by what they feel is the truth, that the obvious answer that's right in front of them goes unnoticed. We've seen Garner's impressive range from exploring her rise as a ruthless crime boss in Ozark to just a few weeks ago with the supernaturally tormented Silver Surfer in The Fantastic Four: First Steps, both of which take advantage of her deceptive appearance. Garner carries an inherent intensity, balancing an unassuming, delicate stature, and Cregger expertly utilizes this duality to craft a nuanced portrait of a flawed, passive person who recognizes the strength they have within themselves and channels that into being a force for good. While initially her grief turned guilt causes her to turn to the bottle, that love becomes a motivator to do something. She owes it to her kids as she takes the initiative, looking in places the police won't and challenging the abnormalities that have been afforded one too many excuses. Justine's transformation is indicative of the kind of public servant she's been all along. However, instead of remaining stifled by the broken system in place, she rightfully oversteps, allowing Garner to turn in a remarkably honest and powerful performance as Justine is allowed to triumph over the cliched downfall a lot of other horror stories might give her character. This narrative mosaic not only represents the various stages of grief Cregger experienced while writing the film as a means to cope with the loss of a close friend, but also serves as a vessel to investigate the different attitudes and institutions in the fallout of a tragedy. What binds these stories isn't just the central mystery, but how each character represents a failing in the systems meant to protect and nurture our children. To simply label weapons as an allegory for school shootings, which is something I can foresee a lot of people doing, is a tad reductive. Cregger is exploring the culture that perpetuates these issues, the rot at the core, our normalizing of the objectively abnormal that has become commonplace in America. Law enforcement, personified by Alden Ehrenreich's Paul, is depicted as tragically ineffectual, consumed by personal crises and professional apathy. Paul's self-destructive behavior and violent outbursts, covered up by higher-ups protecting their reputation, underscore a corrupt police system, ill-equipped and unwilling to meaningfully address societal wounds, instead doubling down on the petty, irrelevant misdemeanors they can exert control over. Ehrenreich's distraught expressions, employing a similar pettiness as his Senate aide from Oppenheimer, shape a character completely unraveling at the seams in the most comically incompetent way possible. Like, the dude's a fucking mess, and it's kind of incredible to watch. Alden is a director's secret weapon, and Weapons advances all of his strengths as a performer. Paul's actions also encapsulate the film's broader message: societal institutions selfishly prioritizing image over genuine progress and solutions, thereby perpetuating tragedies like the one Maybrook is experiencing. Sometimes it seems easier to just let something fizzle out until it's not on the forefront of everyone's mind. At least that's the mindset that the police department has. It's a flawed mindset that ignores the problem entirely. And it's not just a Paul issue, but one shared by the institution he's a part of, and by large swathes of the population of Maybrook. While it's easier for the police to turn a blind eye, disregard outside thought, do less paperwork, it doesn't actually achieve anything, and is directly responsible for the continuing cycle. This is not only true of communal tragedies, but the abuse of power at the hands of law enforcement. They simply make a statement that sounds like they're doing something, or ignore the instance entirely and then fail to address complacent, only looking after their own and nothing more. While there are good cops in the ranks, it's clear they feel hopeless to do anything about the situation since they shoulder the burden of the investigation alone instead of collaborating with concerned citizens who are more motivated to solve the crime. This causes people like Paul to fixate on more solvable problems. Paul especially wants to feel useful, recovering from alcoholism and just having relapsed and dealing with infidelity. He's got a lot on his mind. He's feeling the pressure of everything, and he just crumbles under the weight entirely. Everything everyone does in the fallout of the class's disappearance is to soothe themselves, not actually solve the problem. And the perfect example of that is Paul. Justine is the only person actively doing anything about the disappearance, and yet she's the one accused of acting selfishly. Paul's predicament of relapsing and hooking up with Justine and dealing with the repercussions of his wife, the police chief's daughter, finding out caused him to act recklessly, directing his emotional instability at James, an addict who may or may not have been vandalizing public property. Even with a body cam, Paul's internal frustration wins out as he beats the shit out of James, in turn an act the higher-ups are willing to ignore since they refuse to put their community status in jeopardy. Paul's personal and professional relationships are intertwined and yet entirely self-serving as a means to save his ass when he fucks up. This stands in stark contrast to Justine, whose professional relationships, her relationships with her students, she considers quite personal, and she utilizes everything in her power to serve their best interests. I mean, the metaphor doesn't get any more obvious when Paul, the police, become a literal puppet for Gladys, the ghoul at the center of this entire thing, as she has him under her control, something that could have been avoided had Paul acted with the interest of the kids in mind. On the subject of Paul's dereliction of duty, James, a scene-stealing Austin Abrams, is arguably the standout character, a troubled addict and frequent victim of the community's self-serving negligence, tragically embodies Maybrook's abandonment of the vulnerable. This willingness to let people self-destruct is indicative of how a classroom of kids could go missing. He exemplifies how stigmatization and neglect transform individuals into weapons themselves. James's storyline painfully exposes the systemic cycle of neglect and violence embedded within the very fabric of the community. It's a system entirely disinterested in rehabilitation so much as it is band-aid solutions. They'll just throw someone like James into prison for a small amount of time so they can think about what they've done, or throw them out into the wild and let them ruin their lives, get desperate and do bad things in order to attain the means to get their high. No one actually gives a shit about these people, and that's the problem. Through James, we're almost exposed to the older version of someone like Alex, the lone survival of Miss Gandy's classroom disappearance. Someone who we can assume has selfish, vacant, absent parents that lead to a child being consumed by the worst the world has to offer. Having James discover Alex's possessed parents, these shells of people, we're almost looking into his own past. I mean, I don't think it's a coincidence that James is the one to find the kids hidden in the basement, but distraught, scared, and without any help, he just runs away. Sure, he's motivated by the reward to come forth with the information, but as he approaches Paul, due to their previous encounter in which Paul accidentally gets stabbed by James's heroin needles, and holy shit, that's like one of the funniest sequences in the entire film, Paul doesn't stop to hear him out. He just runs after him, blinded by his vendetta, ignoring very real evidence from James, who is written off as nothing more than a junkie or troublemaker. A perfect example of a system continually screwing itself and the people it's supposedly designed to help and protect. Standing in further opposition to Justine to search for the kids is Archer, played by Josh Brolin, one of the fathers of a missing child, Matthew. He's desperate for answers, spends his nights falling asleep in the bed of his missing son. His actions, his frustration, his anger are directed at Justine at the situation, but they have more to do with himself and the guilt he carries inside. The guilt of being an emotionally distant dad who never really expressed his love for his son. Brolin depicts Archer's torment with such intensity and heartbreak. Though no stranger to playing father figures, this is his most honest and compelling effort yet, coming part and parcel with the film's best F-bomb drop. Through Archer, we see how his hyper-fixation on the same footage, the tangible, the act of his son running away, only causes him to run in circles. He's not really open to other perspectives because it doesn't align with the limited facts he has. Archer is a practical man looking for rational answers in the wrong place, poring over the same footage over and over again, and while he's doing more than the police, his motivation is stunted by a one-track mind. He's only viewing the situation one way, acting irrationally, and purporting to be rational. Perhaps it's only human nature to try to intellectualize and rationalize an irrational response, but it drives a wedge between us and the very people who could be helping him, aka Justine. Which is why it's great when they eventually put aside their differences and link up to work together and actually get somewhere. Again, the obsession over the why obfuscates the ability to actually solve the problem and prevent it from happening again. And then there's Marcus, played by the subtly brilliant Benedict Wong, the principal unwilling to confront uncomfortable truths about his students' welfare, who represents the insidious passivity that enables horrors like the disappearance of Miss Gandy's class. His willful ignorance, fear of negative attention, and unwillingness to challenge glaring red flags reflect a broader selfishness that endangers future generations, the students he's supposed to look after. You get the sense that he has a subconscious fear born from his own uncomfortability being a gay man living with his partner in a predominantly heteronormative environment. It's not outside the realm of possibility that, should he get involved, come to the defense of Justine or challenge the glaringly obvious abnormalities, that he would be ostracized, the victim of bigotry and judgment akin to Justine from a community waiting to turn on them. A gay boogeyman, if you will, to go with the witch. Even when confronted with the answers, Gladys, Alex's witch aunt, who's a composite of Minnie Castevet from Rosemary's Baby, Betty Davis and Baby Girl, and fucking Robert Blake in Lost Highway, he remains in denial. Her unnerving appearance paired with her showing up at his house and performing witchcraft should be a dead giveaway. It's hilarious to the audience, but his persistent denial is ultimately his undoing. He allows a deceptive old crone, literally causing people to snap, to manipulate his instincts. His abstraction of the norm reaches a point that allows for his greatest fear to come true, metaphorically becoming the victim of a hate crime. If Suburbia is a microcosm of the larger problems going on in America, then what happens with Marcus is a microcosm of what happened with the kids. So much of this film functions as a response to how, at least in American culture, we've gotten comfortable normalizing objectively abnormal or awful things, and the people ultimately on the front lines of this societal paralysis are our children. They're soldiers in a domestic war for prolonging the comfort, youth, and excess of our parents and our parents' parents. Cregger understands this and brilliantly employs powerful imagery such as the chilling echo of the napalm girl as the children flee their homes at the witching hour. The story is set in a small Florida town and the children disappear at 2:17 a.m. This naturally calls to mind the tragic Parkland shooting that occurred in Florida on Valentine's Day. 17 children lost their lives in the second month of the year. In the case of Weapons, 17 students vanished, leaving 2 survivors, Alex and Justine. That can't be a coincidence with how meticulous everything else here is. And it doesn't stop there. Archer's son, one of the missing children, is named Matthew, indicating a deeper relevance to Weapons' preoccupations and the significance of 2:17. Yes, I'm gonna go there. I think it's interesting. In the Bible, Matthew 2:17 refers to the slaughter of the innocents in Bethlehem by King Herod so that he would not be usurped by the newborn king, baby Jesus. The passage reads, "Then was fulfilled that was spoken by the prophet Jeremiah," which is followed by a quote from Jeremiah 31:15 about Rachel weeping for her children. This is echoed in Archer's guilt-ridden obsession, which in turn fuels nightmares about his son's disappearance as he follows the same path as his son from the security camera footage. A flashing 2:17 and floating AR-15 loom large over the house Archer wanders into amidst this fever dream. The metaphorical and very real weapon that floats above, plain as day, and yet the very obvious point avoids Archer and those like him. It's not a satisfying enough answer. Not only is this imagery about as subtle as a sledgehammer and indicative of our problem with gun violence in America, but it explains why tragedies like this are so prominent in suburban areas. Chekhov's assault rifle isn't hiding under the table, it's staring us dead in the face, and yet we choose to ignore it. That, mixed with an environment that allows troubled home lives to fester, is a lethal clip waiting to be unloaded. There's something unsettling about the suburbs and the banality of it that Cregger weaponizes against us. Similar to Barbarian, he turns our familiarity with these seemingly safe places of comfort into our worst nightmares. Perhaps it's the fact that suburbia in general is this weird facade used to cover up and seclude people from the realities of the world, leading to disassociation. That disassociation becomes the root cause of the tragedies that befall places like Maybrook and the inability to reconcile with the possibility of evil that has wormed its way into a place thought to be incorruptible. This disassociation leads to irresponsible parents who implicitly trust borderline strangers in estranged family members like Gladys, out of a sense of obligation to show hospitality as their parents did, despite it contradicting all logical impulses. It's pretty clear from the get-go that Gladys is not a good person, and yet we're just gonna invite her in, right? Yeah, that makes total sense. It's whole tragedies that are preventable, but because the very obvious signs were ignored and invited in, they happen. It's Alex, whose parents are neglecting his emotional well-being and needs, compounded by him being bullied at school, being treated so inhumanely by Matthew, Archer's son, due to the issues that he has with his dad, that only serve to further push Alex to aid Gladys in her abduction of the class. If it saves his parents, then, that's all that matters. It's the thing that he should be doing. All the while, Justine is the only person to notice Alex might not be all right. There's a problem at home that spilled over into his attitude in the classroom, and yet, despite her attempt, the signs of his forthcoming actions go unnoticed by everyone else. The facade remains intact, shielding the rot from being addressed. The irony of this is that all one has to do is take a closer look around and they'd recognize that things are not as idyllic as they appear. Gone is the allure of suburbia, if there ever was one, and in its place exists a decaying haven of isolation and entitlement, lacking in empathy, tearing itself apart from the inside. You have teachers on trial for doing their job, affectionless parents, relapsing alcoholic cops who take their self-hatred out on any perp they happen to cross paths with, children bullied and under great duress at home from an abusive relative and or irresponsible parents. This is hardly an ideal place to live. It's a pressure cooker of everything wrong in America. The abstraction of normality writ large. The paranoia that permeates a community and the fear stoked by sensationalist media. The Fox Newsification of the domestic. The real horror, the perpetrators, the leeches, are the ones we least suspect. And yet, they paradoxically couldn't be more obvious if given an ounce of thought. We live in a society directed by self-serving ghouls, the Gladyses of the world, who devour that which we hold most dear, scarring the rest of us with irreversible trauma as we furiously scramble to reclaim our lives. Police become puppets, teachers scapegoats, and kids collateral damage. I found you, Archer says, cradling his lost son in his arms, showering him with the affection he had neglected to show prior. However, as the narration in the beginning indicates, these kids, Matthew,
they never came back.
That's the tragedy of Weapons. It's a story about how we fail our kids, even when we have every opportunity to right the ship, to change the status quo. Miss Gandy's class may have violently torn their abductor apart with glee, and don't worry, I took part in that glee as well. But the damage is already done. There's no real solution from this. It just kind of is. Furious with the status quo, numb and helpless to do anything about it, these kids are forced to live with the trauma they've endured. They walk away as shells of their former selves. They never really come back. With Weapons, Zach Cregger emerges definitively as a vital cinematic voice, boldly confronting uncomfortable truths and societal hypocrisy. While its core ideas are bleak and unnerving, similar to Barbarian, he manages to infuse enough wits and situational humor paired with Lynchian send-ups in the best Shining homage I've ever seen to help the medicine go down. It's a chilling masterclass in suspense and POV storytelling that exposes a culture with dwindling empathy that tolerates dehumanizing acts. Lingering long after the credits have rolled, Weapons is a haunting reminder of our complicity in perpetuating horrors we claim to oppose, and an unsettling reflection of the times we inhabit.